Thank you for joining us for this live broadcast of Manufacturing Talk Radio. I'm Tim Grady, and I am here with Lou Weiss, who is president of All Metals and Forge Group and the founder of Jacket Media Company, the producers of Manufacturing Talk Radio. He also has a manufacturing company called All Metals and Forge Group. You can find that at steelforge.com if you're looking for industrial forging. And because of that company, Lou has followed the Purchasing Managers Index report issued by the Institute for Supply Management for over 40 years. It is such a valuable report that we are joined now by Anthony Nieves, who is the committee chair for the services sector, to talk about the monthly report that has just come out. Anthony, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Always look forward to it, and I just want to comment that the report is again excellent this month. You may hear, if you're listening to the mainstream media, comments like the PMI number fell, it retreated back to. We talk about that a little differently because we understand the report, and Anthony and his cohort, Tim Fiore for the manufacturing PMI, have educated us that this is a roll-up in comparison to the previous month. So this is a roll-up above 50 to 59.9. Great number in the services sector, Anthony.
Yes, it is. We had that, as you mentioned, that slight pullback on the composite index came down 2.4 percentage points, but at 59.9, coming off of a 62.3. And also, we had several months of really strong numbers prior to this, all based on the prior pent-up demand and coming out of the pandemic that we recorded some previous highs or all-time highs over the previous, and it's reflected in what we're seeing today.
Before we get into the actual report, I want to ask a question of you, Anthony. As in the manufacturing report, this has never happened before, where the average in this manufacturing report was something like 62.3 or 4 for the year. And you also, in the ISM services report, you have an average in the 60, low 60, 61, 62. Has that ever happened where you had a year like this?
No, it has not. Not since the inception of the composite index, which happened going back to, I think it was 2008 was when we first rolled out the composite index for the services sector. So coming in at 62.6 as the 12-month running average, nothing like that before.
So to Tim's point regarding other forms of media who are going to go, oh, woe is me, it's collapsing, it's colliding, the world is ending. It's not, folks. It's terrific. Look at your back order, look at your billing, you'll see it. Everybody's doing great. Your show, Anthony.
All righty. Well, as we started out looking at the composite index at 59.9, then we go to the business activity, keeping in mind the 4 indexes that comprise this composite: business activity, new orders, employment, and supplier deliveries. 3 of the 4 had some pullback, supplier deliveries being the only one that showed an increase. And even though we've been hearing things about there being some easing in the supply chain, we still have many impediments as it relates to logistics, availability of trucks, warehousemen, port congestion. That's still ongoing. And this is directly coming from our respondents' comments from the report. Now, when you look at business activity at 59.9, came down 8.4 percentage points, but 68.3 was a very high number for business activity. 61.7 for new orders, it's only down 0.4 percentage points from the prior month, 62.1. That indicates to us what is in the chain, or I should say, what is in the pipeline going forward. So that kind of gives us a leading indication that we'll see some good numbers going forward as well. Employment, big challenge here in this services sector. We know it's a labor-intensive sector. with it coming in at 52.3, it's down 2.4 percentage points. The growth for that index would be stronger if it wasn't for the restricted labor pool. Something else to mention, we've previously talked about the variants, the Omicron that's out there now, which has definitely impacted the labor force. We've had comments coming in saying that even though, and we're seeing that hospitalizations may be going down and cases might be easing, but the effects of this impacting the current labor force is still there, especially in customer-facing type positions. So that's impeded a little bit. It's impacted the business activity. Deliveries I touched on. We're still seeing the same things happen month over month as it relates to supplier deliveries.
Anthony, how are your respondents feeling about the current state of their businesses and the economy as you see this in the report?
You know, I have to look at it in totality versus certain industries are impacted a little differently than others. When you look at these 18 industries that comprise this sector, they're so varied, they're so eclectic, yet the common theme amongst all of them is that year over year, numbers are up. We know that the demand is there, it's exceeding the supply. They're all commenting the same way about that. It varies as it relates to top line and profit margins, but I would say that the prevailing feeling from our respondents is that business is up. They're all struggling with the labor issue. I can't stress that enough because this is going to be an ongoing challenge for quite some time. It's not going to disappear anytime soon. We'll see this. I mean, this has been an impact globally as it relates to the labor force. They also talk about how this variant, as I just mentioned, has impacted their activity a bit, but overall, they're very confident about the current business conditions and going forward. They feel that things will keep improving. We might see, as we see this month, a pullback in the numbers, but that's just a slight pullback. And I think it's more a leveling off because we couldn't keep at that high rate of growth for that long period of time. I mean, we might see some overheating from that. We've talked about that on past shows, but I think overall, to answer your question directly, Tim, the common theme from them is that, yes, we have good business right now. Things are getting better. We still have all these challenges and impediments with the supply chain in place, but we'll eventually come out of it. Big thing, labor. We need to really see how we're going to address this labor issue going forward. They can't backfill positions enough. It's resulting in some wage pressure as well. We know inflation's a big challenge. That's also what they're commenting on every single month about high prices. And we see that with the prices index only coming down 1.6 percentage points, but 82.3, very high index for prices. Demand pull inflation that we're seeing is not going away anytime soon. I know the Fed has mentioned that they will be raising the rates going forward. Probably March, they'll raise the rates. How that affects inflation, whether or not it'll ease or stave the inflation, that remains to be seen.
It seems as though that in spite of the fact that prices have gone up, inflationary pricing has gone up, and not only in services, but also in the manufacturing sector, but it doesn't seem to be slowing down, at least in manufacturing, it doesn't seem to be slowing down. People are still buying, even at inflated prices. So, and the fact that that you have the labor issue, this also, you have more people resigning this past year than probably ever before, you know, taking a shot at going into business and so on. So we have these problems, but it doesn't seem to be stifling sales.
Not at all. Remember 2 years ago on the show, we were talking about the increase in prices and how stainless steel and aluminum and everything else. And I think you made mention of the fact that, you know, a can of soda was going up 10 to 15 cents a can. And we talked about how people are still going to spend the money. They're still going to buy it. Yeah. They may protest a little bit, but they'll go out there and still buy it if they want it. I will say, go ahead.
I was going to say, in addition to, you mentioned aluminum, there's a shortage in aluminum right now. So
Yes.
there's a double whammy on the pricing of aluminum, and I don't hear Coca-Cola complaining about sales going down.
Yeah, it was interesting. I just read earlier in the week about how the whole situation between Russia and over there in Ukraine is also impacting aluminum, because Russia's a big producer of aluminum,
Right.
and that's definitely driven some pricing up there.
This is true. The inflation number, I think it's somewhere around 7%. Or was 7. It came down a couple points. But again, the manufacturers are still writing the orders.
Yes, they are. And when you look at pricing across the board, people are spending money. There was a few comments, I will say, there were a few comments from our respondents this month that indicated that there has been a little bit of fall off in certain commodities based on the cost of those commodities, that there's a little reluctancy. It also, I think, has impacted the export index. We know that from exporting, what gets exported in the services sector is that whole knowledge management we've talked about, technology, information, management of companies and support services. And the comments from the respondents indicate that we've had some challenges as it relates to not only the variant, but the travel complexities, as well as pricing. And even though in that arena, it's not as tied to commodities as you would see on the manufacturing side, and it's not, tangible goods, it's still, there's a cost of doing business. And with labor cost increase, that's impacting what we're seeing. And that's why we've seen that big pullback of 15.6 percentage points in the export index.
Anthony, transportation is always an interesting issue. If you've ever stood next to a freight train as it first begins to roll, there's a tremendous noise as all of the connections between all of the cars engage. And you see the freight train cars shake and rattle a little bit as that tension builds, so the engine begins to pull. And that's kind of what's happening in transportation. It's very unstable at the moment. We've got driver shortages, carriage shortages, difficulty at the ports. Is any of that easy?
Not really. I mean, that continues to be a main thought and comment coming from our respondents month over month. And this month is no exception. Not to, make light of a bad situation, but those freight trains aren't moving too well through Los Angeles right now. I mean, they're getting ransacked. I don't know if you've read about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a big challenge, and the trains are not moving. And it's not just Los Angeles. They're backed up on rails all across the country because they just can't offload them, and the logistical challenges in place. Because, it's intermodal. They have to go from a train to eventually getting on a truck, which gets exacerbated by the challenge that we don't have the drivers, we don't have the equipment, the racks, and we don't have the warehouse people to offload these things as well. So it's just been an ongoing issue.
So do you have a vision of how long the scenario that we're in is sustainable? Everything is good until you actually get it in order and have to ship it. So how long and we're experiencing that with All Metals and Forge as well, that, we have great business, our backlog is grown, but we got to ship it, we got to bill it, we got to get paid for it. So that's a real problem. How long is this going to sustain before the numbers start going down?
Well, I can tell you that our thoughts on this is that we're not going to see any relief through 2022.
No.
We thought, perhaps third, fourth quarter, it just keeps getting protracted out. So I think we're going to see this, if we're lucky, by the fourth quarter of 2022. I think it's just going to carry over because there's not going to be any correction, or I shouldn't say correction, but alleviation as it relates to labor or some of the other challenges we've been talking about on the logistics side.
I would agree, and you're beginning to see some pushback in transportation as we observe the Canadian truckers headed to Ottawa to protest, which means they're not moving goods. And I don't know how many trucks were involved. I've heard 1,000, 2,000, I've heard 50,000, I've heard all kinds of numbers. Doesn't matter, it's not helping the situation. So transportation, I would agree with you, Anthony, it could be into 23 and even 24 if we just try to fix what is really broken in truck transportation at the ports, the port workers, the ships, the ship workers. It's surprising how quickly the supply chain rather fell apart when COVID hit.
Well, you know, your numbers vary on the amount of truckers that are there in Canada. It goes back to that old cliche I like to quote all the time of your mileage may vary, right? So we don't know what truly, we see one picture that's up on the screen on the television or what's in the papers or online, and you really don't know what the true indication is of, or the true picture is for that. And to your point, you're right. Go ahead, Lou, I'm sorry.
No problem. There's a website called marinetraffic.com, and they show you the global map and the 100,000 ships that are in the ocean that can't go into a port. This is mind-boggling.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, the queue is big, that's for sure. It's a large queue right now.
You bet. You bet.
So Anthony, within the 18 industries that make up the services sector, which ones are struggling? So many are doing well. Who is not doing well?
Well, again, you have to look at it month by month. And for this month, there were 15 industries on the composite, right, that were showing that they had growth, right? The 3 industries, and I'll read them off here as I get to that section here. So when you look at the industry performance, you have the 3 industries showing a decrease: agriculture, forestry, fishing and hunting, arts, entertainment and recreation, and information. When you look at business activity, you get a little bit of a different picture because there are 8 industries reporting an increase, right? And then when you look at what's actually showing a decrease, there are 7 industries reporting a decrease. And it's, again, arts, entertainment, recreation, agriculture, forestry, fishing and hunting, information. And those were the 3 common on the composite, but then you add in on business activity: accommodation and food services, transportation and warehousing, real estate rental and leasing, and educational services. Now, 2 things to mention. Real estate rental and leasing is the largest contributor to the GDP in the services sector. Number 2, educational services. What we've seen month over month is the impact that the pandemic has had on in-person enrollment for some of these schools of higher education. And it's impacted not only the tuition for the on-campus students, but also all the outlying type things like the sports arena, the cafeteria, the concessions, the parking. All that revenue stream gets impacted as well.
No doubt. It's curious to me that we talked about mining for so long, a couple of years back, and its struggles. Mining seems to be doing very well at the moment.
Yeah, it's had a couple of blips here and there, but for the most part, yes, 2 years ago, that was the one industry that kept dragging on this sector as far as performance, but it seems to be holding its own. It kind of goes hand in hand. I know we had some challenges with the high fuel costs that impacted the mining industry as well, the exploration.
And I just want to remind our listeners that in the upcoming issue of Manufacturing Outlook e-zine, which you can find at manufacturingoutlook.com, there will be an article on King Coal and how it is doing. So tap into manufacturingoutlook.com and subscribe, and you'll find a lot of great information about what's happening and what's coming up. Anthony, as we wrap up this segment and we look at a very strong services sector, how's it looking for the future? It seems to be rolling along very strong.
Well, I think what we're going to see is continued growth, especially based on that new orders index. It leads us to believe that we'll have growth moving forward in the same, I would say, around the same numbers that we're seeing this month. I don't expect a spike upwards into the mid 60s like we've seen in the past. And I don't expect to see a dramatic pullback either. So we've kind of been leveling off, I feel, or leaning toward that direction for the last couple of months. So we'll see continued growth. We'll still see the same challenges that we've been talking about. Labor is going to be an ongoing issue. It's going to affect employment. Logistics will get somewhat better, but again, that's not going to have a dramatic improvement over the next few quarters either. So, but the outlook remains good, remains positive, and we'll continue to see this ongoing growth for the services sector.
I'd like to make one plug for ISM. On Friday this week, Tim is going to be doing the ISM hospital report. And we think that we did speak about hospitalization earlier. So there is another report coming out tomorrow. I won't be there, but a smiley face Tim will be. And it's a good report. And I think you're listening to the facts and figures and so on, what's going on in the hospital world is important for all of us. So, Tim?
Yes, it is an important report, and that date has changed to Monday, February 7, live at 12 noon. If you have not heard the hospital PMI report, which comes out of the Institute for Supply Management with Nancy Lemaster, it's a great report if you want to truly know what's happening in the healthcare industry and how it's being impacted by COVID. I know that the curve has finally flattened in the US for COVID. The death rates are down, the symptoms are less severe, but the hospitals are still struggling severely with the caseload that they have and pushing out elective surgeries. And so it's a report that you should tune into if you really want to know behind the scenes what's happening. Anthony, I want to thank you as always for joining us for discussing the services sector. One final question I'd like to toss your way. When the feds raise rates in March, and I would expect at least a half a point, maybe 3/4, what's going to be the impact on the services sector and maybe particularly CapEx?
You know, great question. I was asked that same question earlier today. And when I answered the question, the reporter said to me, well, you don't seem so enthusiastic. I said, well, it's meant to stave off inflation, understand the, the strategy behind it, but based on what we're experiencing, because this is an anomaly of what we're going through. It's not just straight inflation. There's so many other variables involved as to what's causing it. We know it's demand pull inflation. We know that there's other issues like wage pressure and things factoring into this. So I don't think it's going to bring prices down in any substantial fashion, but it does have to happen. I understand that. So time will tell as to what will be the long-term impact as it relates to pricing and cost and everything else associated with inflation. So I think there'll be some subsequent increases along the way by the Fed. Not that I have the crystal ball, but I think that's going to be their strategy. And hopefully we can head this off at the pass and get some pricing down into some normal range going forward.
Tim, knowing that you're not a betting man, I'm willing to bet you that the interest rate is only going to go up 1/4 point. You want?
Ooh.
Do I have any takers?
I think it's going to be a half or better.
You got any money in your pocket?
I'm staying out of this one.
I'm in for a quarter. You're in for a half. We'll see how it works out next month during this show.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. I'm liking this already.
Tim and I will have to negotiate the amount of the bet, though. We want
There
to
you
take,
go.
want to take it easy on them. So,
Well, we
for
appreciate
thank you for joining us today, Anthony and Tim.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah. We appreciate working with the Institute for Supply Management. Interestingly enough, we have been working with them since we launched Manufacturing Talk Radio. We've completed 8 years. They've been with us every month to give their reports. So check out ismworld.org. Great organization. And if you have supply chain people and you want to upskill them, they've got some great certifications that your folks should go through at ismworld.org. And as always, thank you for joining us for this episode of Manufacturing Talk Radio.